Let's get back to it. A great leader. I listened to this Che one, but it was a long time ago.
So I hear Amanda mistook you for Che Guevara, Snake. That's not too bad, huh?
Yeah, right. I'm not even worthy of polishing his boots.
Don't be so modest. From where I'm standing, your men see you as a great man.
As great as the century's most complete human being.
That's Sartre, right? Well, there's hardly been a more iconic figure of his times than Che.
Oh, he was more than that. He was a true revolutionary and a great warrior.
I'm with you there. Can you believe that when he first went to Cuba with Fidel, they had only 12 guys with them?
But they rallied. They brought in new recruits, won the support of the peasants, expanded their organization.
And in the end, they overthrew the Batista regime.
People flocked to them because they were honest. They won because they were strong. Those are the qualities that make men great.
You know, we're kind of in the same boat they were back then. Here we are, a handful of mercenaries taking on an army backed by the United States.
Yeah, we've got a long way to go.
But we've got to keep on going. It's not just about winning in battle. You need to think about recruiting people and growing this operation.
Got it.
The more I think, I mean, maybe it's just how Miller's written. He just seems really naive.
Hey, Snake, I've been thinking. Maybe Che couldn't find a place for himself outside the battlefield either.
How so?
He led the Cuban Revolution to victory. That's quite an accomplishment. He could have called it quits there and nobody would have blamed him. But he left behind a loving family and a cabinet post to plunge back into the struggle. First in the Congo, then in Bolivia where he met his end.
You're overthinking things. Che went back to the battlefield because he was needed there. Read his farewell letter, then you'll understand.
Some say he was too idealistic to fit in with the government.
Too many scruples, most likely.
Maybe so, but I still can't help thinking the reason you look up to Che is because you see something of yourself in him. You left your country behind and plunged into battle. You wander from one battlefield to another, going wherever you're needed.
Che was a revolutionary as well as a warrior. He took up arms to fight for his beliefs. I don't do what I do for any ideology. I'm a warrior. Nothing more. Nothing less.
Okay, boss. You're right. Just wanted to see how we stacked up against a real hero.
No ideology. I don't know. Maybe not yet.
Boss, did you ever read Che Guevara's book, Guerrilla Warfare?
I can't remember if I got to that one or not.
You should have. That's why I lent it to you. A lot of the guerrilla tactics it covers apply to sneaking missions, too. Che was one of the first people to articulate the theory of guerrilla warfare. T.E. Lawrence, Lawrence of Arabia, was another one. And Mao Zedong and his On Protracted War. Theory aside, Nicaragua's General Sandino was one of the first to put guerrilla tactics into practice, which explains why the Sandinistas named themselves after him.
If you think about it, guerrilla warfare itself has been around since ancient times. There's only so many ways a small group can upset a large army.
There was a samurai in Japan who excelled in guerrilla warfare.
No kidding.
Tsunoki Masashige. He was a warrior who lived in the medieval era. He used unconventional tactics to help overthrow the Kamakura shogunate.
Like what?
Trojan horse-style maneuvers and decoys to confuse the enemy. The best one was when the enemy was climbing the castle walls. He dumped boiling water and human excrement on them.
Sounds great. Let's put it in the MSF playbook.
You're not serious, are you, boss?
Why not? We've got plenty of crap to unload.
Yeah. I'll think about it.
Gross. Matty? Mate?
What's wrong, Kaz? You sound beat.
Yeah, the problems never seem to end around here.
You should take a break. Share a cup of mate with the other guys. It'll give you a chance to connect with them.
I wonder if Che and his men ever sat around and drank mate.
I bet they did. Che was famous for his love of the stuff.
Oh, man, whoever thought of this was a genius. You can put it in a gourd and carry it around, and there's a special straw with a filter attached so you can drink it any time.
That's not all. It's full of essential vitamins and minerals, too. Nice to have in a guerrilla war when food is short.
Yeah. Wish I had a chance to share some with the blonde Parisienne when I was out hiking.
Well, how do you know about that?
It takes a thief. Or should I say it takes a snake to know one. Snake.
What? Wow. Sweats.
The year the Cuban Revolution was won, Che visited Japan as a member of an economic delegation. While he was there, he visited Hiroshima.
Hiroshima?
Since he was there to discuss economic issues, Hiroshima wasn't part of the original itinerary. Some said the Ministry of Foreign Affairs didn't want to let him go, but he went anyway. He snuck out of his hotel and took an overnight train.
Traveling guerrilla style. Sounds like Che, all right.
He visited the Peace Memorial Museum and the Atomic Bomb Survivors Hospital. Apparently it gave him quite a shock. As a doctor, it must have been painful for him to see how the victims suffered.
Nukes destroy everything.
He was quoted as saying, "They put you through this, and still you do whatever America says." Those words really hit me hard, especially when I think of my mom. He said something else, too. Let us all love Hiroshima and its people.
I can believe it. Che never managed to numb himself to other people's pain. That's why people loved him. And why he died.
So educational.
That bandana you're always wearing, that thing's a real antique. Ever think about getting a new one?
This one's fine.
Come on, we can't have our boss wearing a raggedy old thing like that.
It was a gift, okay? It wouldn't be right to get rid of it.
It was. Okay then. Speaking of which, Che supposedly had a black scarf he used to take everywhere with him.
A scarf?
One of his comrades gave it to him when he broke his arm in battle. Che used that silk scarf as a sling, and the comrade who gave it to him became his second wife.
Alida, right?
Even after his arm healed up, he never went anywhere without that scarf. What about you? You get that bandana from someone special?
No, nothing like that. It's important to me. That's all.
God, these Miller and Snake conversations are so awkward. Get that from someone special? Sounds boring. I thought Miller was going to talk about his scarf.
You were saying Japan has a peace constitution too.
Yep. Japan renounced war in Article 9 of its constitution, aspiring sincerely to an international peace based on justice and order. The Japanese people forever renounce war as a sovereign right of the nation, and the threat or use of force as a means of settling international disputes. In order to accomplish the aim of the preceding paragraph, land, sea, and air forces, as well as other war potential, will never be maintained. The right of belligerency of the state will not be recognized.
You know it by heart.
Some things you never forget.
Impressive. There were some parts I didn't quite get, though. Like the whole means of settling conflicts thing.
Yeah, that's been the subject of debate, whether or not it forbids any and all use of force. The current Constitution was originally drawn up under the Allied occupation. The first draft was even submitted by Allied GHQ. So naturally, there are some who feel the Constitution was imposed on Japan by foreigners.
Things like that are never simple. Same for every country, I guess.
One thing's for sure, though. Not having an army let Japan focus on economic recovery after the war. In that sense, it's the same as Costa Rica.
So, kind of explains Japan's problem with North Korea right now. They're always dumping nukes in the ocean there.
Kaz, you were in the Japanese Self-Defense Force, right? I thought that Article 9 you were talking about earlier prevented Japan from having an army.
Yeah, and that's another subject of controversy. The Self-Defense Force is an organization for the purpose of defense, Article 9 of the Constitution does not deny Japan's right to self-defense. Therefore, the SDF is constitutional. That's Tokyo's official stance.
Sounds complicated.
Call it what you will. It's a distinctly Japanese way of interpreting things.
What a perfect answer.
The U.S. has military forces stationed in Japan, right?
Right. Even though the Allied occupation ended, American forces are still stationed there under the U.S.-Japan Security Treaty.
Unlike Costa Rica.
Part of it stems from the occupation, but Japan also occupies a key strategic position from America's perspective. It's next door to the Soviet Union and close to China and North Korea as well. It's integral to the security of Pacific Asia. For America, Japan represents a barrier against communism.
What about for Japan?
As you might expect, there's deep-rooted opposition to the alliance. In 1960 and 1970, when the treaty was up for revision, there were mass protest movements against it, especially in Okinawa. The U.S. only gave it back to Japan 2 years ago, and American bases are still concentrated there. It's a heavy burden for the Okinawans to bear.
Then why don't they scrap the treaty?
Lots of reasons. There's the imbalance of power with the U.S., of course, and if Japan pulled out, they'd be losing the nuclear umbrella America provides. And as for whether the JSDF could defend the country after the Americans left, I really couldn't say. Costa Rica is in a similar situation. They depend on the Inter-American Treaty of Reciprocal Assistance, the so-called Rio Pact.
So, the countries with peace constitutions end up having to rely on other countries' armies. Kind of ironic.
On the flip side, not everybody in America is satisfied with it either. Some people argue Japan is freeloading off America's security guarantee.
Of course.
And you know how Japan's industrial exports are making inroads in the States.
Yeah, I've got a Japanese camera myself. Best damn camera around.
Japan's low defense spending allows it to invest more in economic recovery and expand its share of the American market. That's a bitter pill for Americans to swallow.
Leave it to Snake to point out the whole so-called irony that you mentioned.
You know that today, Japan is under the American nuclear umbrella.
Right.
The U.S. vowed to retaliate against any country that launches a nuclear strike against an allied country. That promise deters nuclear attacks against America's allies, hence the term nuclear umbrella. But suppose the Russians nuke Tokyo. Would America really nuke Moscow in return? If they did, the Soviet Union would undoubtedly retaliate. Would Washington really be willing to risk having a bomb dropped on itself in order to avenge Japan? I'm not so sure.
Don't tell me you're still worried about Japan. After all these years?
It's not that.
To be honest, I'm not convinced either. But Moscow faces the same dilemma. Maybe Washington wouldn't retaliate on Japan's behalf. Then again, maybe it would.
So you're saying Moscow wouldn't want to risk being attacked either?
The whole concept of nuclear deterrence is entirely hypothetical to begin with. When you get down to it, it's all smoke and mirrors.
Smoke and mirror. This whole nuclear umbrella thing's kind of interesting. Or what Miller said, America vows to attack anyone that launches a nuclear attack on its allies, and considering the only nuclear attack ever was the United States on Japan, so it's kind of funny.
Japan shall not possess, manufacture, or allow the introduction of nuclear weapons into Japan. Those are the 3 non-nuclear principles set forth by the Japanese government.
Allow the introduction? That's funny. Some of the U.S. warships that visit Japanese ports are armed with nukes. Or are you going to tell me they transfer them at sea onto other ships every time they visit?
You raise a good point, Snake. But the Japanese government doesn't recognize it as such. The introduction of nuclear weapons into Japanese territory would need to be agreed upon in advance. America hasn't made any such agreements. Therefore, they aren't bringing nukes into Japan. That's the official excuse.
Doesn't sound like much of an excuse to me.
I don't blame you. Keep in mind, though, Japan suffered actual nuclear attacks. Anti-nuke sentiment there runs deeper than you think. I suppose the government's not really in a position to admit that sort of thing.
JSDF.
So tell me, Kaz, how's the self-defense force you were in different from an army?
The JSDF is set up for national defense. It's not configured for aggression against other countries. It's what you'd call exclusive defense.
Exclusive defense?
It's the fundamental strategic posture of the JSDF. No preemptive attacks. Only the minimum defensive action necessary after an enemy attacks.
Anything defined as self-defense, then?
The JSDF originated as the National Police Reserve. Back then, American forces stationed in Japan were being sent over to fight in the Korean War. So in a sense, the NPR was filling a gap.
Police, huh? Reminds me of the Costa Rican Civil Guard.
Yeah, exactly. They're also dispatched to provide disaster relief. The year before I joined, they had a hell of a time trying to rescue some buses that got hit by landslides.
One more.
So why'd you quit the JSDF?
Because I didn't have a reason to be in Japan anymore.
A reason?
My mom had died 3 years earlier, so I didn't have to care for her anymore. With her gone, there was no point hanging around in Japan.
Yeah, but a man with your talents could have risen pretty high in the ranks, I imagine.
I don't know what they made of me. Could be it actually alienated me from the brass. And personally, I could never get used to the idea of exclusive defense.
Meaning?
On a strategic level, I can see how a country could go with the exclusive defense model used by the JSDF, and I've got nothing against my fellow soldiers who believe in it. On a tactical level, though, it just rubbed me the wrong way. To put it simply, I was itching for a real fight.
I figured.
And I felt as long as I was in the JSDF, I'd never be able to stand shoulder to shoulder with my father, who was in the U.S. Army. Seeing Yukio Mishima's suicide didn't help either.
Oh boy.
Yukio Mishima, the guy who wrote The Temple of the Golden Pavilion.
The way he questioned the status quo hit home with me. Not that I admired his vision or anything, but it did get me thinking, that's for sure.
I think that's the guy whose suicide was on TV. So I guess Miller's mom must be Japanese. I mean, he's blonde, so he said, I don't know what they thought about me. So I wonder if that's what he meant. Well, join us next time for an in-depth look at Miller.